started. So the idea I had was to basically dig a very old version of MISP out of my drawer, and as it just so happened, I had a fairly old virtual machine, like a 2.4.95, and I wanted to basically see what are the various steps to upgrade such an old machine to something like more recent or latest. During during this recording, I also will kind of like show the differences between where we are now and what was actual during 2495. Because, for example, there was no SSL by default back then. Also, I will make heavy use of the installer helper scripts. If you have ever done a MISP install, kind of like on the command line by yourself, it's a lot of copy pasta going on. But there's actually our install script does most of that. But if you do an upgrade or you do like anything related to maintenance, having like at least one of the helper scripts sucked into your current environment is making your life much easier. So in theory, I have a terminal, and in practice, I am logged on. Now, a good thing is always to kind of see is anything from the system actually in need of a little update. In this case, I think it's also a fairly old Ubuntu. And let's see what we have there. Oh, it's 1804, but .1 LTS, so we are now at 1804.3 or something like that. So ideally, we would also upgrade that. Things to be careful about. If you check now what is upgradable, oops, we will see a huge list of stuff. And if you do this on a live machine, obviously you're not going to randomly upgrade the packages without going through the list of the upgradables. Obviously, all the security updates want to be done regularly. Careful with Apache updates, because they will eventually just restart your Apache machine. Be careful also about PHP bumps. So if PHP has sort of a major upgrade, that might break your MISP install. Okay, well, in our case, we will now take a look at our actual login. And the first thing we will notice is if we're going to go to the SSL version of the virtual machine, it's going to say, okay, there is nothing SSL going on here. So in our case, it's still on port 8080. It's kind of a forward that happens if you use the virtual machine. So forward from your host to the guest VM. And if we log in, and I think it's admin.test. The first initial password is admin. And then we will update our password quickly. So you see this machine has never been booted before. So it's fairly old, to say the least. The first thing, apart from, let's just assume that you actually configured the VM correctly. So the thing you would actually do if you do maintenance, you go in server settings and maintenance. One first thing you will see here, because it's an initial install, there is a lot of red happening there. That's because in the beginning, when I developed the auto VM generator, I didn't really pay attention to setting up um, certain defaults for your for your VM, um, because yeah, like that was just not where we were at that point with the auto generator. So in newer versions, this will all be way more clean, and there will be settings that are not correct. That are correct. Sorry. So and here the other thing is, if you update your machine, um, it will say that there are more incorrect settings because new settings might have come in during all these versions, which they have. Anyway, let's go to diagnostics, which also tells us a healthy 9 things are broken. The first thing we will see is currently we're at version 2495, and the latest available version is 24124. If you will blindly now do update MISP, in theory, this is okay. In practice, you might first want to check out what happened during the latest rounds of development, like if there's anything you want to be careful about. We had kind of like an internal debate in the core team. What is better? Do you want to kind of live on the bleeding edge, or do you want to kind of tag at a certain version? Like this is now literally doing a git pull of the latest code that is committed. And it's I don't know. It's kind of like if you're careful and you actually read the commit messages a little bit because you care about your software you deploy, and you actually want to understand what that software does and how it evolves, there is not a big issue to just update to the latest and greatest. So in that sense, you can just actually do this and you'll be fine in most cases. Okay, anyway, now we see actually the updates. Very similar if you would do git pull on the command line. And there's obviously a lot of things going on here. Mostly because we have changed the way the submodules get pulled in, like the main cake PHP stuff. So it's a warning. We can ignore that for now. And also bear in mind, generally you wouldn't upgrade from 2495 to 24124 in this case. How often should you upgrade? Regularly, I guess. Like, take a look at it like a couple of weeks. Every couple of weeks, what is going on. Or, of course, you might actually hit a bug. And then what you want to do is check out the issues, if there is actually issues that are related to your bug, and then file an issue, and eventually the bug gets fixed and you need to update anyway. Now the blocker here, because it has not been updated, I can tell you that, even if everything is green. The blocker here is the app composer.json. So this file is in the way and will get overwritten by the merge because obviously Git is a little bit conservative. Luckily, it will not just overwrite random stuff. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at in our terminal what is happening on in that folder. So now the first thing I would do is actually go again onto the install docs, and here basically if you go into the install guide, you will see that how to install is basically ideally you get this random shell file from the internet and execute it on your machine. Read it, it's there, It's not malicious. You should still read it. And mostly, what is interesting here now, if I go and check out actually this raw file, it should give me a hint. Where did I put that? Not there. Okay. Anyway, well, this is actually the installer script, and it gives you hints on how to install the core of MISP. By the way, if you do this, your virtual machine, your virtual machine or whatever your Ubuntu install should be kind of clean. This script does not consider already an Apache that is pre-configured and has already SSL stuff, so be careful with that. This is always a clean install script. But why, do you ask? Well, because this is the easy way of kind of rolling out a fresh and clean install of MISP in our case. Anything else really kind of like random, like maybe you have a reverse proxy going on, or God knows what, you have other sites there, and considering that, not so fun. So ideally you just install it on the fresh machine. The other thing is, of course, having like a shared host is not really clever for an information sharing system, especially if you have like sensitive data on there. So yeah, wouldn't really recommend that. But what I wanted to do is, oh yeah, now I remember where it is getting in this. Like here we've got the MISP configuration variables. And what they do and are, they basically set some defaults the installer script expects, and mostly in defaults I expect if I do maintenance on my MISP instances. And what I did, but yeah, that's just like because I use this too. On the top of the global vars shell script here, I put a little eval, and what that does is it's basically reading in the markdown file of the variables, strips everything, and then kind of executes it on the shell. So, for example, what I now have is the default for the www user. Not. Oops. So something went wrong. Who would have thought? Yeah, because I'm a twat. So yeah, basically now it is in my environment, but I haven't executed it yet, because what it does, if we would have paid attention, it exposes now a function called MISP vars, and if we now run MISP vars, it basically now is in our environment, and if I now do echo www user, it is actually there. So this just assumes that www data is our Apache user. Again, it's kind of to make life easier when maintaining stuff. So now that we have done that, I can go into my MISP directory. This is the default MISP directory, and the first thing we see is permission denied. This kind of has changed in later versions of MISP, because yeah, some users were a bit confused on why they got a permission denied, so we relaxed the file permissions a little bit on the www data, on the MISP roots directory, so the path to MISP in that sense. Yeah, that's kind of by choice. Also, once your machine is ready for production, you do want to properly harden it, and that includes checking the permissions of the MISP directory. We give recommendations, best practices, but in the end, it's everyone's kind of responsibility to anyway further harden the machine a little bit more. So in my case, I will just become that user www.data, and now it's a little bit more accessible. So the first thing I would do is a small git status to see what is going on. So we see, okay, our app composer JSON has been modified. This JSON file it's not exactly a log file, but just it can be kind of like reset. And to easily reset a file here, you just go git checkout, and then you go app composer.json. Double check with the git status. We are clean. We can now do a git pull. Now we could, of course, because we are the correct user, we could just do a git pull in the command line, but I prefer to do it actually on the web interface. So let's go ahead and do that. Back to our machine here, zack, quick reload, just to make sure everything is still more or less fine. Okay, yeah, still looks good. Update, yes. This will be a little bit faster now, because we already kind of downloaded stuff. Ooh, and it kicked us out. That is a preventative measure, actually. So what happened now? We updated our repository, and that's also a reason why it's good to do it in the web interface, by the way, because ongoing updates and mostly database updates, it just logged you out, which is kind of like a sane way of handling it on not having race conditions. Of course, if you've got an instance with 100,000 users and they are all massively hammering it either via the sync user or via other means, what you there want to do is you want to basically put MISP into maintenance mode. I can show you in a minute how that actually works. It's basically just a setting that you can apply, and then the user will get, in theory, logged out, and will get a message that's basically, hey, we are in maintenance mode, come back when ready. First thing we see now is that actually we are updated to 24124. So something happened. Whether it worked or not, well, we'll see. Also, bear in mind this is an empty install. I should really do this with a pre-populated VM where there's data inside. That would be fun to see, because then maybe something might go wrong and we can fix it. Anyway, back to server settings and maintenance. Oh, there's like a couple of critical things that are not configured yet. These are typically things that you do want to take care of, especially like this might become an issue if new like maybe protection measures. In this case, the MISP external base URL has been added as something you want to make sure that that you set. Same with the MISP base URL. Generally, when in doubt, or you don't really have an external facing URL, just put it the same as your base URL, and that's what like most people need to do. Anyway, let's go further down. Here's another thing: you can set your MISP live or not, and that's already like the way to put the entire thing into maintenance mode. So let's double check if yes, there we go. So basically, if it's not live, you can set this custom maintenance message, which, yeah, again, like this this gives you a neat way to kind of interact with your users. Yeah, and this is basically bad UI X. Oops, let's cancel that out. So basically this gives you the possibility to kind of tell your users what to do in case you are doing maintenance updates. I'll have to double check actually if you actually switch from live to not live if you are being logged out. I do not know that. I shall find that out later. Anyway, so now it's looking a little bit better. There's still something critical. Oh, MISP disable emailing true. That just basically means because by default on the VMs there is no mailing setup for various reasons. That's kind of something you really want to do yourself. Maybe use an upstream mailer or you know like a smart host kind of situation. So you have to configure that yourself. That's why it's kind of telling you, hey, something's off here. The default tag collection, let's see what options we have at the moment. The problem here is not so much that that there is no default tag collection. It's more that there was like nothing set because it's a new parameter that happened during our update. The like it's not set, that's why it's complaining. So now that we have actually set a value, it's happy again. Scrolling further down, anything more red? Ooh, yeah, this is a scary one, but an important one. Like at a certain point, we stopped relying on the Python packages on your base system. Because reasons, in our opinion, it's like better to have a virtual env or a pipenv or a whatever, kind of a self-contained Python install, which has other problems for fucking sure. But basically, what this allows you is kind of like easier updates for us, easier debugs for you, because if something doesn't work on the Python front, you can just roll the entire Python venv and then it might just work. To do that, you basically need to point MISP to a binary, a Python binary, and you would typically do that here, which now of course does not work because this is command line only. It's done with a cake command, which, by the way, if you use the if you use our MISP vars thing, it does expose the cake command. I thought $cake maybe. Yeah, $cake. So what we now would do is $sudo underscore $cake. Okay, so that works. Another shortcut here in the environment variables we just have loaded a while ago. We also have exposed the variable sudo underscore $, and that is basically an alias, if you want so, although it's not an alias. It could be an alias, but it's not. So that basically does sudo as the web user. If you have a custom install or your user is Apache, depending on which platform you're on, you can of course change that quite easily on the top of the MISP vars thing. And then if we take a look at $cake. That is basically just calling the cake command. And again, because we don't have permission to go into the var MISP directory, we get a permission denied. Anyway, back to our browser. Now we see, okay, that's spinning because I double-clicked something I cannot edit. We'll ignore that for a second. That's yellowish, so that's cool. So we're mostly good. Green is good. Green and yellow is good, so that's fine. Let's reload the page. It still complains about a critical error. Oh, that's the disable emailing. Yeah, again, like if we put this to false, now everything is better. But again, I would like, so on the production environment, obviously you don't want to have a critical message. So for the sake of this exercise, we'll just leave it at that. What else is going on now? Let's take a look at the diagnostics again. In the meantime, also take a look at the workers tab. The workers are complaining that there is one worker not running. We'll take care of that in a second. The important part here is we are currently up to date, if you want so. It's kind of running. As a matter of kind of hygiene, just scroll through the page and see if everything is still more or less okay. What we see here is that the recommended PHP version is 7.4. Again, that's recommended. That doesn't mean that it has to be, but it is highly recommended. And then also, in case you wonder, okay, but why do you recommend 7.4? Well, a couple of very useful links. Here's the PHP supported version URL. This gives you an up-to-date view on which version of PHP is supported until when. And we obviously follow their timeline. That's how a language works. It changes, it gets obsolete, it gets updated. So currently, I would actually say, like, if you have 7.3, you're good. If you have 7.2, you might want to plan to upgrade towards something higher, ideally 7.4, which is the current stable and actively developed and maintained one. If you're living on the edge, try something even newer. Personally, I do that for everything that is like Ubuntu or Debian. I'm constantly on the edge to anticipate if stuff kind of changes in the future, where we have to adapt our install procedures and so on and so forth. Same thing for Python. This is the PEP 0373, and that's just basically like 2.7 is dead since a while, but now it's officially dead. We do not support any Python 2 anymore anywhere because we had time to kind of adapt. Further, one thing that also has changed, so the memory limit for PHP, we have kind of adapted that to chill 2 gigabytes. And previously it was at 512 megabytes, which the installer does for you. It does the recommended settings for memory limits and so on and so forth. The question then, of course, is how much physical memory or virtual memory do I eventually need? It really depends. You know, modern day machines. If you want to go gung ho and just like, okay, 1 gig for my instance is enough. Yeah, but no. So ideally, like go 8 gig for the start and take it from there. It's a server in the end. But of course, if you just have a low volume instance, you play it cool. You don't have large events with 200,000 attributes. You'd probably be okay even with less memory. But as soon as it becomes a little bit more, plan ahead. 8 gigs is more than fine. So to change the memory limit is fairly easy. It's in the php.ini, and I think even, do we? That's a good question. Like, do we have I think we have an ini thing, or maybe not. I thought I had the PHP ini in my script, but apparently not. So now we need to kind of find the PHP ini, which is buried, somewhere here. And we've got two. We've got the command line one and the Apache centric one. Ideally, you would change both, but we'll just change this one. The command line one, we don't really rely on that much. Like, even though all the cake commands are instantiated from the command line PHP interface, it in general doesn't do anything memory intensive. In case that's not true, we'll fix it. But I think as far as I know, all the things you do via the cake interface is more of a send a command to update a user, reset a password, and so on and so forth. That's not memory intensive. So now we're looking for the memory limits, and here we see it's at the moment set at 512. Let's bump that to 2048. Now we reload Apache, and some people might now cringe, but I am an init person, mostly because systemctl and or services, or I don't know, I just do it like this. Reload our Apache. Careful difference, reload, restart. Reload just reloads the Apache daemon, meaning new connections will get that reloaded state. A restart just kind of removes all active connections, and that's maybe bad. So reload ideally under circumstances of live maintenance. But of course, you put your system into maintenance mode, so you don't have to worry that much about it. Let's reload to see on our web interface if that has been considered, and yes, now it is the recommended 2 gigs. In a second part of this video, I will do the basically the delta of all the new functionalities that we have enabled in the current virtual machine generator, and that is, for one, GD. GD we use for screenshots of some web pages and so on and so forth, or just like generally like any image content that might be in your MISP instance to kind of have a nice preview. Back in the day, when we wrote this virtual machine, this was not enabled yet. So same for SSDeep. SSDeep is not enabled in this install, and we will enable that eventually at a later date. So basically, yeah, the second and maybe the third part of this will be how do I add more functionality when I come from an older version. I will also show how to not only update MISP core, but also how to update the MISP modules, how to update PyMISP in case you use PyMISP. I will also talk a little bit about PyMISP, what it is, what it does, and yeah, bear in mind, if you made it this far into the video, it should be quite clear that this is really like we're covering our basics here, with a healthy amount of command line explanations and so on and so forth. Going further, the other thing we have implemented, and that is one of the other changes that has happened, but again, mostly for us, because we kept having issues with some sizes within the database structure. So some tables all of a sudden would like explode, and we wouldn't necessarily know why and how and when. So we added a SQL database status. As far as I know, that was Sami who worked on that, and that's also one of the things. I'll try and semi-name drop people, so that if there is a very particular thing you might want to get an eye on, if you open an issue, you could actually just mention the person who might be the one who has developed that, which is obviously easier also for us, because then we immediately know what you think at least is the issue, and who might be a good person to respond to. Anyway, so the SQL database status, it just shows you like what is currently used in the database. It's like size on disk of the database files, kinda, and also what can be reclaimed. That's a again, that's a maintenance thing for maybe later. How can we reclaim that? Like for example, there's the warning list entries. Ooh, there's 4 megs reclaimable. Eventually, that might be way more. So Redis info, okay, looks all good. The advanced attachment handler, that's basically everything MISP modules related. Because during the MISP modules install, all of that stuff, PyDeep, Leaf, and PyMISP and Magic got installed. Further, coming to the import export stuff, if you want so, there is like a Stix2 library we use, and currently we are way out of date there, so we need to update that as well. And then the PyMISP is also out of date, so we would need to update that too. But what I'm going to do for all of that, I will make another part where we can basically add a virtual environment, a Python virtual environment to our current install, and then it's way easier to update these things in the future. Because bear in mind, if you randomly go sudo pip install whatever, it will pollute your base Python modules system. Like you want to avoid that. If you really know what you're doing, you can do it, because you kind of know what side packages are and how that works and where they are not. But I play it safe, and I just use a virtual environment because, yeah, you can nuke it, you can redo it. Yara is also not installed, so PL Yara, again, it's a Python module. We'll install that later in our virtual environment as well. GNU-PG is working. That's always good. ZeroMQ is up and running. That's good too. If you want to see what the status is, at the moment we have no processed messages, so that's kind of normal because it's an empty instance. Our proxy is not configured, so that's okay. Here, okay, the enrichment modules are okay, so all of that is fine. The Cortex module system is not enabled. Cortex is kind of MISP modules, but for the Hive. The Hive is an incident response management tool and more. And basically, they have a great system called the Cortex module system, and you can basically use those modules within MISP as well. For the rest, okay, that's it for the administration settings page for now. Let's check the workers tab. So at the moment we see most workers appear to be healthy. There is one issue here. The update worker is not running, and if workers are kind of down or not running, we can either just restart all the dead workers, or we can just start a worker manually. And honestly, last time I tested this, I had the problem that the update worker wouldn't come up immediately. Here, it worked, but if that is the case, just give it another second or so and try to start the worker again, reload the page, and see if the worker is back up. So that looks pretty good. Let's double check security settings. There's apparently one thing that it's complaining about, and it's exactly this one. So this is another new feature which we have added. It's the self-registration feature. meaning you have a MISP instance that is maybe interesting for the general public, or maybe you have a large corporation, or you have in general a large community, and you want not to manually manage the registration. You can now basically use the self-registration system, where I can show you that with an example. But I have to copy that URL from somewhere. Just a second. Because as you might know, we are hosting a COVID-19 instance, and for that particular use case, we needed a way to manage the flood of new registration requests. So here you see how it will work. You basically click on register new user, and then you give your email address. And this is exactly the same as it looks if you activate this on your on your instance. So email address, organization name, org UUID. Custom roles. So the org UUID or the organization's name, why is it optional, and why can you actually specify it? The idea is, like, if you already connect to or want to create a new user on an existing MISP instance, and you know that your organization has already an account there, an organization account, you can just already let us know what is the organization, and then ideally you would give us your UUID of the organization, because then your account will be immediately linked to that organization. But be careful, bear in mind that you also then, depending on how the organizational rules are, you need to come from an email address that is also linked to that organization. So bear that in mind. And then the custom role is also interesting, especially if you have mainly an instance where you want people to synchronize with. So now here, basically, if I know, okay, I need a sync user, so a user that uses the API underneath MISP to get the data, I can just basically say I want a sync user. And then the PGP key, optional but always useful. You can then just also already give us your public part of your PGP key. Again, all the messages that get sent via email have to be, want to be encrypted before they go over any public email systems. And then message to the admins. In our case here, this is kind of like, okay, yeah, you're interested in joining this community. Just give us a little heads up, maybe what you're doing with it, maybe who you are as an organization, if it's a new organization, to have a better idea how you where you're coming from, basically. Good. That's the self-registration message where the value is not set. Again, this will only be shown if it is actually enabled. So if you want to get rid of this this mini warning, you just double-click the actual message, and then you just say, okay, save that value. This is the default value now, and then your security settings now will have no warnings anymore. That's something in general that I do during the new install. I set all the same defaults. I just kind of bake them in so that the initial overview doesn't look so ugly with a gazillion incorrect settings, in the sense of, like, okay, you saw just now, it's just a standard message that wants to be there. Anyway, how are we on time? Oof, 45 minutes, great. So that's approximately everything you need to do if you want to upgrade a MISP install from very old to fairly recent. What are the issues you might have? Um, you might have very weird database issues if you really come from a very, very, very old version of MISP. Um, nothing isn't. It's everything is recoverable, but you just might see some data weirdnesses. And if that is the case, open an issue on GitHub and tell us more about it, because maybe you had an edge case, always possible, or maybe you need to go to some of the legacy administrative tools where we had some like cleanups that had to be done in prior versions. But of course, well, here we're talking version 2.3, which you should definitely not be running anymore. So basically, that really depends on what your version is. Apart from that, I think that's more or less it. I'll leave it at that. And this will also be on YouTube, I guess, and I'll link a couple of things I talked about in this video, and yeah, was a first test. I'll see where it goes from here. Again, I really want to go through the entire nitty gritty of how do I technically maintain a MISP install, and then if there's any questions or suggestions, of course. You're more than welcome to ping us on Twitter at MISP Project or at CircleAlu, and then we'll just get back to you once we have a solution. Anyway, thank you very much.